Imagine a quiet night when the cold air slowly wraps around your body and the sounds of the world grow softer. Nothing is hurried around you. Only the whisper of wind brushing against leaves and the faint echoes of an earth that has lived for countless ages. In such silence, we can let the mind wander gently, not seeking answers, only observing whatever rises within imagination. A night like this does not demand right or wrong. It only invites us to sit, to listen, and to allow curiosity to work in its gentle way. Like water dripping slowly from a block of ice, time itself seems to drip around us. Each second is part of a long journey, not something to be chased, but something to be savored. Picture a small fire burning in the middle of the darkness, its flame moving calmly, giving just enough warmth, but never blinding. Around that fire, we can sit, letting the story begin to flow slowly. The story we are about to explore tonight is not an ordinary one. It is not a tale of great victories or figures who demand to be remembered with grandeur. Quite the opposite. It is a tale of something elusive, something never fully revealed, something mostly buried beneath soil, mist, and ice that is frozen for thousands of years. We are about to step into a world that seems to hold secrets which only occasionally whisper to those willing to listen quietly. Perhaps we will not find definite answers, but that is the beauty of this journey. The ancient world, buried beneath the layers of ice, is not a history book written clearly. It is more like a shadow, more like a dream left behind within the layers of the earth. We can only touch fragments, tracing softly, never fully possessing what lies within. So before we truly begin, take a slow breath. Let the body feel calm. Let the eyes grow heavy, and let this story flow like a clear stream. We will walk far back in time to an era when this world was still unfamiliar to humankind. To a time when ice covered the lands and hid forms of life we have never known. Tonight, let imagination work. Let every description be a bridge toward peaceful sleep while still leaving behind a subtle curiosity. Imagine sitting by the edge of a frozen lake, its surface shimmering under the pale light of the moon. The wind drifts softly, carrying a chill that pierces yet soothes, like a whisper arriving from a time no longer known to us. In that setting, the mind begins to drift, slowly detaching itself from the noise of daily life, adjusting instead to the rhythm of an ancient and secretive earth. Each breath we exhale appears as a small cloud of vapor, quickly vanishing into the air, as if symbolizing how brief human traces are compared to the span of time guarded by ice and soil. Around the lake, trees stand like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with snow, their frozen limbs shaped like long fingers pointing toward the sky. No sound of birds, no footprints of animals, only the stillness that wraps around everything. Such silence can feel unfamiliar, for modern people are accustomed to a constant background of sound. But in front of this primordial landscape, the silence becomes music of its own. We begin to realize that the world does not always need noise to hold meaning. As we gaze upon the frozen surface, sometimes a faint glimmer can be seen within, as if something is trapped beneath the clear yet unyielding layer. Perhaps it is merely the moon's reflection, but perhaps our imagination senses more. What if below, Buried in stillness rests the fossil of a great creature that once roamed thousands of years ago. A woolly rhinoceros, an ancient horse, or perhaps a mammoth that once walked peacefully through forests, now surviving only as memory. We do not know, and it is this uncertainty that keeps the mind moving, seeking answers that may never arrive. The calm of this night seems to grant space for reflection, that beyond all technology, all noise, and all the clamor we know, there exists a world that remains silent, patiently keeping its secrets, a world that never rushes to reveal itself. An ancient world locked in ice, waiting only for the air to warm, for the ice to melt, to briefly show what once was. We, with all our limitations, can only sit and imagine. Perhaps we will never witness directly what lies within the ice, but a quiet night like this gives us the chance to draw nearer, even if only in thought. And in that calm, we are invited to accept that not every mystery must be solved. Some are enough to be contemplated, enough to keep us company before sleep, enough to keep curiosity alive in the heart without ever demanding certainty. Around 2 million years ago, the Earth was gripped by a long ice age, a period known as the Pleistocene. At that time, vast lands that we now recognize as modern continents were covered by thick sheets of ice, as if wrapped in an eternal blanket. In the northern hemisphere, these layers reached thousands of meters, pressing down the soil, reshaping rivers, carving valleys, and creating great lakes that would later stand as witnesses to a world slowly transforming. Winds blew fiercely, carrying endless snow, while beneath them, life adapted in ways difficult for us to imagine. Across Eurasia and North America, immense plains stretched, not the green grasslands we know today, but barren steppes. Dry and frozen, inhabited by colossal beings that now survive only in fossils and imagination. Woolly mammoths roamed in herds, woolly rhinoceroses strode across valleys with their sturdy frames, and giant ground sloths moved slowly through frigid forests. They coexisted with early humans, who were still learning to wield fire, stone, and primitive language. It was a harsh world, yet balanced in its fragile way. Within the layers of ice and frozen earth, countless stories were buried, never recorded. No writings, no inscriptions, no chronicles exist to give us certainty. What remain are bones, teeth, and frozen tracks. From these, researchers attempt to weave a narrative, but like an incomplete puzzle, each new piece discovered always leaves others missing. The mystery of that age only deepens, urging us to keep asking, even though we know no one truly holds the answers. If we close our eyes for a moment, imagining that landscape, perhaps we can see the dim winter sun that barely rises above the horizon. Imagine the thin air, the heavy steps of great beasts leaving prints in snow that never melts, and the cautious movements of early humans seeking shelter, seeking food, struggling to endure. That world was far removed from the comforts we know. Yet it was there that the roots of our history grew, there that the mysteries of ancient life remain preserved. And now, as the ice that for millennia has sealed that world begins to melt, we are granted the chance to glimpse into the past, not in the form of complete tales, but fragments, pieces that never fully align. Yet enough to remind us that this earth holds deep layers of secrets, layers that open only when their time has come. Imagine the vast expanse of Siberia thousands of years ago, when the land was still locked beneath eternal ice. During the long winters, the sun rose only briefly, casting pale light that scarcely warmed the earth. The northern winds blew fiercely, sweeping snow across every trace left by passing creatures. Beneath that silence, the frozen soil preserved secrets that would only be revealed slowly as the ice began to melt. Under the hardened surface, the bodies of mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, ancient horses, and other creatures were locked as if in a deep slumber, waiting for the time to be seen again by a world utterly different from their own. In Alaska, Greenland, and northern Canada, similar landscapes stretched endlessly. Glacial mountains stood like colossal walls, and in the valleys between them flowed rivers that sometimes froze completely, only to awaken again, when brief seasons brought a touch of warmth. Picture herds of mammoths moving across barren plains, carving trails that can now be traced only through preserved grasses in the soil. Imagine early humans following from a distance, not as rulers, but as passengers, struggling to endure in a world far larger than themselves. Yet there is something more mysterious. In certain places, researchers have uncovered caves holding faint paintings, hand imprints, or traces of charcoal from ancient fires, as if early humans not only survived, but also sought to understand the world around them. Did they witness the creatures we now know only from fossils? Did they sit in the cold night, watching mammoths from afar, then carve their forms into stone walls? No one knows for sure, for the traces are too few, too fragile to answer all the questions. That era, the world seemed alien, yet at the same time strangely close. For it remains part of the Earth's history beneath our feet. Each block of melting ice brings us back to that time, as if opening a small window into the past. We may not see the complete picture, but the fragments are enough to spark imagination, enough to let the mind wander, envisioning a world that once existed and slowly vanished without a sound. And therein lies the mystery. The melting ice is not only a sign of climate change, but also a kind of doorway opening to the past. What lies beneath is not only fossils and bones, but also stories never told, lives once beating, then silenced, secrets perhaps never to be fully understood. That ancient world, though silent, still speaks in its own way, only to those willing to listen quietly. When we speak of the world buried beneath the ice, we are truly speaking of layers of time that were never fully recorded. Imagine a book whose pages were burned away, leaving only scraps along the edges. And from those scraps, we try to guess the story that once filled the middle. Such is the mystery of the Neozoic Age, slowly uncovered as the glaciers melt. There are mammoths found with fur, flesh, even the contents of their stomachs preserved, as if they had only just fallen asleep. There are ancient wolves preserved with jaws still open, teeth sharp as if ready to strike. There are forests buried with roots and pollen that can be analyzed, offering a glimpse into climates of thousands of years past. All of these are fragments, yet fragments strong enough to awaken questions. Within the frozen ground also lie layers of microbes that have slept for millennia, waiting to awaken. Scientists warn that melting ice may unlock things that perhaps should remain sealed. Ancient diseases, unknown bacteria, or even forms of microscopic life utterly different from anything we know. No one can say for certain. They may be dangerous, they may not. They may simply be another part of a greater story we have yet to understand. Yet for the human imagination, that thought alone is enough to spark awe, unease, and a humbling awareness of how small our civilization is compared to the vast history of the Earth. Furthermore, we can imagine how early humans once looked upon this world. They walked among the cold stones, gathering bones scattered on the ground, lighting small fires to survive the cutting wind. They likely never knew that one day their descendants would stand in museums, gazing upon those same mammoth bones with wonder. They likely never imagined that every small step they took on frozen plains would become part of a larger story sought, studied and debated by generations in the distant future. There is something else that deepens the sense of mystery. Certain discoveries suggest objects that seem out of place. Carved pieces of wood, stones that appear chiseled, or bones marked with patterns resembling deliberate cuts. There is no definitive proof that these were made by humans, but the possibility casts shadows of an alternate history. What if there was something older than we believe? What if the story of humanity on Earth began far earlier than we currently understand? Such questions remain unanswered, but precisely because they remain unanswered, they continue to live, circling in the minds of those who seek to comprehend these mysteries. And perhaps that is the essence of it all. The melting ice does not only reveal the past, it also opens a space for imagination. We face not only scientific facts, but also an endless curiosity. Every fragment of bone, every strand of fur, every preserved seed is an invitation to reflect. That lost world may never fully reveal itself, yet within its uncertainty lies its beauty. The ancient world remains alive, not in bodies or voices, but in quiet whispers, gently touching our thoughts as we sit still, imagining. Imagine for a moment you are standing at the edge of a vast plain surrounded by icy mountains. The wind blowing softly, carrying fine snowflakes that glisten under the faint light of the winter sun. Before you stretches a frozen expanse of silence, as if the entire earth were holding its breath. There are no machines, no noise of civilization, only the whisper of the wind speaking in a language you have never understood. In the distance, a dark silhouette moves slowly, a woolly mammoth walking calmly, its long fur swaying with the wind. It pauses briefly, lowers its head, then with its massive trunk brushes aside the thin layer of snow to reach the dry grasses trapped beneath. Life in this ancient time seems simple, yet within that simplicity lies a grandeur beyond words. If you step closer, you will see a small herd of ancient deer pressing their noses into the frozen ground, searching for the little food that exists. Their bodies are thin, but their eyes still shine with the instinct to survive. A large bird passes low overhead, perhaps a predator watching the movements of animals below, ready to strike when the moment comes. Life on this plain moves slowly, unhurried, as if time itself drifts more gently beneath the Neozoic sky. Yet beneath the stillness lies danger, often unseen. From behind frozen brush, a saber-toothed tiger waits, its body pressed low, its eyes sharp like nightlight reflecting off shards of ice. Patiently it waits, waiting for the deer to falter, waiting for the chance to leap. No loud sound breaks the air, only a growing tension, as if the entire land anticipates the brief eruption of life and death. And when it finally springs, the world seems to tremble, only to fall silent again moments later as blood stains the white snow. You sense this world is not only harsh, but beautiful. Each step of an animal leaves a trail on the snow, a trail soon erased by the wind. Nothing here is truly permanent, not even the mountains of ice that seem eternal but slowly diminish. Everything moves in cycles, life appearing, surviving, then fading. And within that movement lies a quiet balance, as if the earth itself still spoke in its own tongue. Sometimes I wonder how early humans experienced all of this. They may have walked slowly, bodies wrapped in animal hides, carrying small torches through the endless nights. They looked at mammoths with awe, but also with fear. They saw the saber-toothed tiger and knew only a thin line separated them from prey. This world was their home, but also their greatest test each day. In the biting cold, with danger lurking, they found the meaning of survival. And somehow, within those limits, they still dreamed, still lit their fires, still looked at the sky with questions not so different from our own today. If you walk further into the valley guarded by walls of ice, you will find the remnants of small lives often overlooked by eyes searching only for the grand. Moss grows in cracks between rocks, pale green surviving despite the piercing cold. Small insects sleep within cocoons, waiting for a gentler season, though that season may never truly arrive. There is a frozen river that still carries a faint current beneath its surface, water moving slowly like the veins of the earth, reluctant to stop their pulse. All these small details are proof that though harsh, this world is still full of life, and each life carries a story as valuable as that of the mammoth or the saber-toothed tiger. By the frozen river's edge, you may notice bones half buried in snow. These bones are not ordinary, too large in size, too strange in shape, their color long faded to a pale gray through time. You can imagine the creature that fell here thousands of years ago, its body slowly consumed by seasons until only a skeleton remained, now standing as a silent witness. The passing wind does not care. The falling snow does not care. Yet for humans who would gaze upon it in the future, every fragment of bone is a doorway opening into questions. The lives of early humans in this valley were also filled with overlooked details. They may have sat close together around a small fire, lighting torches from damp branches, trying to dry animal hides to make clothing. At their feet lay a simple stone tool, patiently chipped, though rough in form. That tool was used to cut meat, to skin animals, or to scrape bones for marrow. Nothing remarkable if seen at a glance, just a jagged stone edge, but within that stone lies the trace of thought, the trace of human effort to endure, the first glimmer of imagination about how to shape the world around them. Sometimes the long night dropped colder than usual. Winds circled, carrying sounds like whispers, though they were only the friction of frozen trees and cracking ice. Early humans may have heard those sounds, sensing something present in the darkness, something unseen. They may have called it spirits, or perhaps only silence too thick to explain. But within each faint sound lay a mystery that stretched the night longer and dreams stranger. Then, when morning arrived, thick fog hung in the valley, masking every shape. A mammoth passing by appeared as a massive shadow, emerging briefly before vanishing again. Birds flying low sounded like faint voices from another world. Humans walked slowly through the mist, leaving footprints that quickly disappeared beneath the snow's white cover. All of it made this world feel like a vast stage, where everything appeared briefly, then faded, leaving behind an emptiness filled with unanswered questions. On a lower plane, not far from the cracked foot of a glacier, lies a layer of frozen earth split by a small river. From that fissure, objects sometimes emerge, carried slowly by the current before resting on the banks. There is a massive tooth, no longer whole, its surface worn down yet still bearing the shape of a creature larger than any elephant known today. There is a broken horn, hollow within, as though it once held the echo of an animal long gone. There is a charred piece of wood, perhaps the remains of a fire, kindled by early humans, or perhaps only the work of lightning striking a forest now buried. No one can be certain, for each object stands alone, without context, as if flung from a past unwilling to explain itself. At night, if you stand by that river, you feel a sharper cold, not only from the air, but from a heaviness, as though silence itself carries weight. The sound of cracking ice comes like small explosions, then echoes far into the distance, creating the illusion of the earth speaking in the language of fractures. You see faint shapes in the water's surface, perhaps only the distorted reflection of the moon. Yet imagination quickly turns them into something more haunting. In that state, it is easy to believe the ancient world never fully left, that it only hides, waiting for its return. Traces of early humans also appear in unexpected places. There are scratches on stone, straight lines too neat to be natural, too deliberate to be chance. There are small punctures in animal bones, marks of simple but effective tools. There are circular patterns in frozen soil, as if people once sat there, gathered, doing something we cannot comprehend. Yet all of it halts at the edge of mystery. No complete proof, only hints that tempt us, enough to raise questions, yet never enough to give answers. Beneath the beauty of this world lies a shadow. The great beasts that seem magnificent in imagination often died cruel deaths, falling into frozen marshes or swallowed by sudden blizzards with no chance to fight. Their bones scattered, slowly buried, became the cold archives of the earth. Even humans did not always survive. Skeletons have been found curled upon themselves, perhaps frozen in long sleep, perhaps caught by storms that came without warning. No one knows their last stories, but the bones remain, holding silences heavier than words. And perhaps that is what makes the Neozoic world feel so foreign to us. It is not merely a past that can be explained with dates and data, but a landscape soaked in quiet sorrow, where every object carries traces of loss. In every fragile tooth, every broken horn, every scattered bone, we find that history is not only about the grandeur of mighty creatures, but also about the fragility of existence. All of them, no matter how great, were ultimately subdued by cold, by time, by a silence that cannot be resisted. Imagine a cold morning in a Neozoic valley. A thin mist covers the plain, and through that mist, the silhouettes of early humans slowly appear. They walk with heavy steps, their bodies wrapped in rough animal hides, still carrying the faint smell of blood not fully washed away. No ornaments, no decoration non function mattered. The hides kept out the cold. The bones they carried served as knives. Sharp stones lashed to wood became crude spears. Their lives knew nothing of comfort, only the bare necessities of survival. Children move quietly among the adults, not laughing as we might expect of childhood. They are silent, heads bowed, occasionally staring wide-eyed at the mammoth tooth hanging from their father's waist. The world is too cold for games, too harsh for innocence. They learn quickly, not through stories, but through wounds. If their hands bleed when grasping a sharp stone, no one soothes. They only a cold stare that says, "Learn." Fire is the center of every night. In the middle of a circle of stones, a flame burns faintly, never large, for wood is scarce in the frozen land. They sit around its dim glow, their faces marked by shifting shadows, as if spirits of the past danced within the flicker. Meat is roasted roughly, often still raw inside. No spices, no flavor beyond bitterness and smoke. Yet for them, it is enough to endure. The smell of burning fat mingles with the odor of unwashed bodies, thickening the air until it nearly suffocates. There are moments of silence when they stare into the darkness, as if waiting for something to emerge from the mist. Perhaps a predator lurking, perhaps only the illusion of fatigue. But vigilance never fades. Even in sleep, their bodies remain rigid, ready to awaken at the slightest sound. Sleep is not comfort, but a fragile pause between dangers. Death is no stranger. If someone falls ill, their body weakens. They cannot always be helped. No medicine beyond simple roots. No long prayers beyond whispers barely heard. If one dies, the body is sometimes left by the river, for the earth and animals to finish what the living could not. No graves, no markers. Just disappearance. The ice sealing the story with silence. Their daily life is a cycle of hunger, cold, and fear. Yet within that cycle lies a profound quiet, as if they had always known the world was not a welcoming place, but a test that wore them down. And still, they endured scratching marks on stone, lighting small fires, hanging bones at their waist. Simple traces, but enough to pierce through millennia until we can see them now. On a night darker than most, when the moon was hidden behind heavy clouds, the early humans gathered around a small circle of fire. The fire was no longer just warmth, but the center of a ritual that left no record, only shadows we can imagine now. They sat in a ring, faces flickering with trembling light, their eyes not meeting each other, but fixed on the empty space in the middle, as if something unseen was present there. From their mouths came low murmurs, not a language we could recognize, but whispers, almost like wind sliding between stones. In the circle's center, An elder placed a long bone, perhaps from a mammoth or an ancient deer, and drove it into the ground. Around it, he scattered bits of charcoal and small stones taken from the river. His movements were slow, as though each action carried meaning, though that meaning is long lost to us. The children sat farther back, eyes wide, unmoving, watching in silence. Women clutched small stones tightly in their hands, as if the stones could absorb their fear or their unspoken hopes. The murmurs grew louder, turning into a hum, repetitive and monotonous, yet powerful. Within the hum was a rhythm, not complex, only simple, but enough to create a different atmosphere, one that made the air feel heavier. The small fires swayed with their breath, shadows shifting along the earth's walls as if dancing. Was this a prayer, a spell, or simply their way of fighting fear? No one truly knows. Sometimes one of them raised a sharp stone and made a small cut on their arm, letting a drop of blood fall onto the earth. The blood landed beside the planted bone, and though it was only a drop, they all watched with solemn eyes. No one shouted, no one cried, only silence, only gazes, as if that drop was a bridge between their harsh world and something larger, darker, or more mysterious. When the ritual ended, the fire was allowed to die. No more would add it. They rose slowly, no word spoken, only heavy steps leaving the circle. The bone remained standing in the ground, surrounded by charcoal and small stones. By morning, snow might cover it, hiding the remains of the ceremony, sealing it into eternal silence. No gravestone, no record, only a faint shadow that they once believed in something we cannot fully understand. Within the layers of melting ice, modern researchers once discovered a small object that defied easy explanation. It was not bone, not fossil, not the frozen remains of an animal. Its shape resembled a carved stone with fine scratches across its surface. The scratches did not form a clear picture, only curving lines repeated again and again, as if someone patiently and deliberately etched them thousands of years ago. There was no recognizable mathematical pattern, yet it did not appear random either. The object was found near the remains of a large animal, as if it had been placed there intentionally, perhaps as a marker, perhaps as an offering, or perhaps by chance. No answer could be certain. When examined more closely, other marks were seen, nearly erased, as though time itself had tried to wipe away a message once left behind. Some suggest it was an early form of human expression, perhaps a symbolic language, perhaps meaningless scratches. Strangely, similar patterns have been found in other sites separated by thousands of kilometers. How could such likeness appear in places where people may never have met? That question hangs still, unanswered to this day. The melting ice continues to reveal such fragments. Pieces of wood preserved without decay, held perfectly intact by eternal cold. Plant fibers still whole, though they should have long since crumbled. Even small beads made from seashells have been discovered, though the site lies thousands of kilometers from any coastline. How such an object traveled there, who carried it, and for what purpose remains a profound mystery. Every artifact brings more questions than answers. Each scratch on stone, each tiny bead, each preserved wood fragment is like a faint whisper from the past. Not a clear whisper, but a distant echo, feeding curiosity rather than satisfying it. Researchers write reports, compare data, build hypotheses. Yet behind it all lingers a quiet awareness that perhaps some secrets were never meant to be fully understood. The ice keeps its patience, and when it melts, it offers fragments, not the whole story. As the Siberian ice slowly melted, researchers uncovered something both astonishing and unsettling. From within the frozen layers emerged the body of a woolly mammoth, nearly intact, as though it had died only yesterday, though thousands of years had passed. Its skin still clung to the flesh, its thick fur, rough though fragile. Even its stomach still held undigested grass. It did not appear as a fossil, but as a body locked in a long sleep. Eyes tightly shut, mouth seemingly poised to chew. Looking at it made time feel folded, for what lay before them was not a dry skeleton, but the tangible presence of a world long gone. The massive body drew attention not only for its size, but for the strange impression it left behind. How could such a huge animal die so suddenly, preserved so perfectly, untouched by predators, untouched by decay? Some suggest it was trapped in a sudden snowstorm. Others that it fell into a swamp that froze instantly. Yet still, the way the body endured so completely left an unease, as if something was not entirely explainable. Stranger still, when scientists dissected its insides, they found tissue still fresh, blood frozen like dark red crystals, even organs clearly recognizable. This opened possibilities for modern biology, with some attempting to extract DNA, some even dreaming of reviving the creature through technology. But behind such ambition lay a quieter question, just as profound. Should we disturb what time itself has laid to rest? The mammoth was only one among many such finds. There was also the woolly rhinoceros, unearthed almost whole, its horns still hard, its hide still unbroken. Ancient horses, frozen wolves, even cave lion cubs, appearing as though asleep beneath the ice. Each body whispered the same message, that the past had not truly died, but had been suspended in silence, waiting to be seen again. Yet whether they waited to be remembered, or to serve as a warning, no one truly knows. Imagine a group of early humans hunting along a frozen riverbank, when suddenly they see a massive mammoth trapped in mud that hardens into ice. The animal groans, a deep sound echoing across the valley, its tusks thrashing wildly, its thick fur coated with ice, clinging tighter and tighter. They stand frozen, neither attacking nor approaching, for what they see is not merely prey, but something greater, something beyond explanation. They watch as the giant body slowly ceases to move, its eyes freezing open, its final breath escaping as a mist that crystallizes instantly in the air. Within hours, the living creature is no longer life, but a colossal statue of flesh, fur, and ice. For early humans, such an event may have felt like a sign, whether from the earth, the sky, or the spirits they believed in. They might have approached cautiously, gazed upon the body from a distance, then left small markers around it. Perhaps stones arranged, perhaps branches broken. There was no writing, no record, but a strong sense that they knew this was no ordinary occurrence. They might have seen it as a message, a warning, or even a gift, for the frozen flesh could be used without the peril of hunting. Yet there is also the possibility that they felt fear. The sight of the frozen giant body, eyes staring blankly toward them, might have made them believe the beast was not truly dead, but waiting. Waiting to rise again, or waiting to be forgotten, no one can tell. Perhaps that is why bones have been found scattered near such carcasses, as if a small ritual had been performed, placing markers to keep the spirit of the animal at rest. For us, viewing it now through the lens of modern science, the event seems like a natural process. But imagined through their eyes, the scene is heavy with quiet tension, a mixture of fear, awe, and smallness before something far greater than themselves. Early humans never wrote this story, yet the frozen bodies in the ice are silent records that they once stood as witnesses to a drama that will never be repeated. In a valley surrounded by dark, silent pine forests, a frozen river stretches like a long sheet of glass with faint cracks running across it. The trees rise tall, their branches heavy with snow, bending as if watching something they dare not speak of. The wind carries a distant murmur, like a groan from far away that can no longer be identified. Perhaps the sound of an animal that once lived. Perhaps only the shifting of ice deep within the ground. Along the forest edge, the land is covered with frozen layers that swallow the footprints of anyone passing by, as though everything that crosses is meant to be erased by time. Nothing moves, except shards of ice that fall softly from the tree branches, striking the ground with a faint sound that vanishes instantly into silence. Nature seems to hold memories invisible to the eye. The river that once rushed now lies frozen, yet inside it there may still be small fish trapped in a long sleep, waiting for a season that will never come. The cold wind is not merely a breath, but a carrier of messages from another age, sweeping across the valley with a piercing touch. If someone were to stand there long enough, they might feel as though something was watching not with eyes, but with a silence too perfect to ignore. The forest is not merely a backdrop, but a witness that never speaks. The trees may have stood there hundreds of years before the first humans set foot in that valley. They inhaled the same air, saw the sky change colors, watched giant beasts come and go, and kept it all within rings of wood that remain unreadable. In their stillness, they preserve stories never told, as if letting the mystery stay locked beneath their rough bark. The frozen river, stretching like the veins of the earth, is the quietest record of all that has ever happened. Each tiny crack on its surface is a mark of time passing, yet no one can guess what lies beneath. Perhaps bones trapped, perhaps branches swept away centuries ago, or perhaps something else never meant to be found. All buried in layers of ice that thicken, then melt, then freeze again, creating a history not written, but still present. The forest, the river, and the valley are not merely places, but a kind of memory space that never vanishes. They preserve evidence without words, testimony without witnesses, only presence that endures across ages. For early humans, perhaps it was just a backdrop full of omens and dread. But for us now, 'tis proof that nature is more honest than human records, because it does not choose what to keep. It simply keeps everything. In the distance, There stands an iceberg that never looks the same from one day to the next, for wind, light, and time continually change its face. During warmer seasons, long cracks begin to form, running down its body like pale blue veins, slowly widening. The cracks echo with a deep, resonant boom, like the earth drawing a heavy breath, sending faint vibrations into the surrounding ground. Then, one afternoon, when the dry northern wind blew harder, the iceberg split, its front collapsing into the sea with a deafening roar, creating waves that rose high yet quickly subsided, leaving behind a silence far heavier. Inside the fractured iceberg, hidden chambers appeared, like corridors carved by invisible hands. Sunlight streamed through the openings, reflecting against the icy walls, creating a strange pale blue glow, as if it were light from a world that knew neither day nor night. Within those corridors, the air was bitterly cold yet dense, as though filled with something unseen. Perhaps ancient particles of air, perhaps only echoes of time locked away. The footsteps of anyone entering would stretch long, resonating before vanishing into the thicker silence. Those chambers were like the womb of the earth, holding things never touched by human hands. Within the layers of ice were faint shapes, unclear whether they were fragments of wood carried by currents thousands of years ago, or the bones of massive creatures whose bodies never had the chance to decay. The light illuminated these forms, making them seem alive for a brief moment before they sank once again into the frozen stillness. There was no sound, only the faint drip of water trickling slowly, marking that time still moved even when everything seemed frozen. Deeper inside, the corridors branched, some narrowing, some widening, as though forming an invisible map never meant for human eyes. Each path held a possibility, perhaps leading to a larger chamber with shimmering walls. Perhaps to a dead end dense with ice, or perhaps to a place from which there was no return. Anyone bold enough to step inside would feel an unease, not merely from the cold piercing their bones, but from the presence of something harder to explain, as though they were standing in the belly of a living giant. The fractured iceberg was not merely a frozen mass, but a doorway into the past trapped within. It held layers of ancient air, grains of dust from falling stars, perhaps even traces of life we never imagined. Every drop of water falling from it was a fragment of history dissolving slowly, vanishing without sound, returning to the vast sea. In that silence, there were no answers, only the feeling that one stood before something older than all human records. Something quiet, yet filled with stories that would never be complete. The ice corridor grew deeper, and anyone stepping forward would feel as though they were entering a frozen cathedral, built not by human hands, but by time and eternal cold. Its walls rose high, glittering like crystals that scattered sunlight into fragments of blue, green, and violet, spinning as if thousands of stained glass windows had been arranged at random yet in perfect harmony. Every drop of water falling from the ceiling sounded like the chime of a distant bell, filling the space with a slow rhythm, quiet yet sacred. In such dense silence, even the sound of one's own breath felt too loud, as though each exhalation was a small disruption to the sanctity of the place. Shadows danced faintly along the walls as the light shifted, sometimes resembling the silhouettes of creatures that once existed. Some appeared like great deer with branching antlers, some like birds with wings outstretched, and others were unrecognizable, too foreign to be named. Perhaps they were only illusions cast by reflected light. Yet in this stillness resembling sleep, imagination could feel more tangible than reality. Every step felt like disturbing something that did not wish to be disturbed, though nothing truly emerged from behind the ice walls. Deeper still, the corridor widened into a great hall, with columns of ice formed from the dripping of thousands of years, rising like pillars supporting a lofty ceiling. The chamber felt too vast to be merely natural, as though designed by something aware of form, composition, and beauty. From the ceiling, icicle stalactites hung like cathedral organs, forming a visual harmony indescribable in words. When wind entered through a distant crack, the stalactites trembled slightly, producing a thin resonance that echoed, resembling a long whisper, a choir without lyrics. The cold in that chamber was different, not merely physical, but emotional. A cold that weighed upon the chest, as though carrying memories of something lost. Perhaps the memory of creatures once trapped, or perhaps the memory of the earth itself, which had seen a warmer world before, being consumed by ice. Among the shifting glows of blue light, there seemed a promise that the chamber held not only lifeless forms, but also something deeper, something unexplainable in words, yet felt like a shadow brushing against the skin unseen. That frozen cathedral was not a place made to be inhabited, but to be awaited, to be witnessed. It was a silent record of time stilled, of beauty formed without intention, of mystery never meant to be discovered. Whoever left it would carry a memory not easily forgotten, not because something clearly appeared, but because of the sense that they had once stood before a space older than imagination, a space filled with whispers that never ended. On one side of the frozen cathedral wall, sunlight entering through a narrow crevice struck at just the right angle, revealing a faint form previously hidden. There was something embedded within the layers of ice, a dense shadow with contours resembling a skeleton. From a distance, it looked like blurred lines, but the longer one gazed, the clearer it became that this was not an ordinary crack. There was a structure of bones forming a head, a jaw, and a curve of ribs. That ancient face was not fully visible, only partly, as though it struggled to emerge from its frozen prison, yet was held back by a cold that gave no chance of release. The fossil seemed to watch, though no eyes were visible. Its shadow followed the light's direction, making it appear alive, even though it had been buried for thousands of years. An observer might wonder what kind of creature once bore such a body. Was it a woolly rhinoceros buried beneath the snow of a time long before our birth, or a great predator with powerful jaws now surviving only as a frozen silhouette? There was no answer, only faint outlines that forced the mind to search for meaning. Around the fossil were tiny fragments trapped within the ice. Splinters of wood grown fragile, a strand of ancient grass long dried, even insects whose wings remained visible, though their bodies had lost all color, all preserved with a fidelity no museum could ever imitate. The ice had become a more faithful archive than human records, keeping everything without preference, from massive creatures that ruled the land to tiny insects that flew unnoticed. To behold that fossil felt like witnessing a photograph never meant to be taken. It was an image formed by accident, by death caught at the wrong place in an unavoidable moment. Yet precisely because of that, it became a more honest witness than any tale. It did not try to tell a story. It simply existed, frozen in silence, waiting for someone by chance to find it and remember that life once passed here. That faint face in the ice carried a melancholy weight, as though eyes were nearly meeting, but never could. It evoked emotions hard to explain, a blend of awe, fear, and pity. Awe at the magnitude of such a life form, fear at the depth of silence surrounding it, and pity because it had perished without remembrance. Like a ghost from an age we never lived, the fossil remained there, unmoving, unchanging, waiting for the ice to melt and eventually release it back to the earth that once consumed it. Drops of water began to fall slowly from the ceiling of the frozen cathedral, trickling down the wall where the fossil was trapped. Their sound was so soft, almost like a whisper, yet in the stillness of that chamber, each droplet echoed long, as though every drop was the tick of an ancient clock, marking the passage of time. Sunlight entering through a narrow gap struck the droplets, making them glisten briefly before falling onto the frozen ground. From the cracks forming along the icy layers, the fossil appeared slightly clearer, as though the curtain that veiled it was slowly being drawn aside. There was no true movement, yet the feeling was that of watching something asleep for far too long, now gently disturbed by the touch of a shifting season. The drops were few, yet enough to suggest that the ice was no longer eternal. It was weakening, surrendering to the faint yet persistent warmth. Up close, the thin layer around the bones turned translucent, revealing details once hidden. The shape of teeth appeared faintly, curved with the strength of something once powerful. The curve of the ribs, too, became more distinct, like a skeleton still guarding the hollow within. It was as though the past was being unveiled, revealing an ancient face waiting for the call to awaken. Yet no awakening truly occurred. It was only the illusion of small changes, prompting thoughts of a life that once was. The creature remained still, bound by the layers of ice that held it. And yet, those droplets served as symbols that time could never be fully restrained. Ice, no matter how solid, would eventually yield. And when that moment came, this ancient body might be released, carried by the currents of a melting river, or discovered by curious human hands. In that vision arose a melancholy question. Was it better for the creature to remain buried in peaceful silence, or to be found, studied, and displayed as evidence of a past that could never return? Around it, the great chamber remained silent. The falling droplets were the only sign of an unstoppable process. No animal stirred, no wind entered, only that rhythmic sound, simple as the ticking of a clock in an empty room. The fossil, though unmoving, seemed to listen, to wait, aware that it was slowly being freed. The atmosphere created a strange calm, as though time itself was preparing something, but in no hurry. As if the world wished to remind us that all that has lived will eventually be revealed, even if it takes thousands of years to resurface. The icy corridor now seemed more like a breathing space than a passive frozen block. The sound of dripping water, once so distinct, gradually mingled with other echoes that defied easy explanation. At times it resembled a faint whisper of wind slipping through a distant crack. At other times, a low murmur rising from within the earth. The sounds were not loud, almost imperceptible, yet precisely because of their subtlety, they felt more real. As though not only the ears heard them, but the body itself absorbed their vibrations. It was as if a remnant of life lingered behind the icy walls, imprisoned in silence, attempting to speak in a language comprehensible only to those patient enough to wait. If one were to stand long enough in the middle of that passage, they would perceive faint patterns within those sounds. There was a rhythm, irregular yet recurring, as if born from activities once present in that place. Like heavy footsteps marching and then fading, or the noise of solid objects scraping before dissolving again into quiet. It remained uncertain whether these were mere figments of imagination, or whether the ice truly stored the echoes of the past, releasing them only when it began to weaken. Every droplet striking the floor seemed like a trigger, a tiny door opening to let ancient memories slip out for a moment. From an imaginative perspective, the corridor was no longer merely an empty space. It became a kind of stage where faint shadows of the Neozoic era appeared and then dissolved. Some might perceive it as shapes of light moving behind translucent ice, while others only sensed a presence without form. The sensation gave the impression that ancient creatures still walked, still breathed, separated only by a thin layer of fragile time. And yet, at the same moment, the awareness that these were only traces brought a melancholic calm, for there was no real threat, only gentle whispers from history left behind. For those who entered that space with an open heart, every faint sound became an invitation to reflect. Did the world preserve all of its traces in ice, in stone, in soil, releasing them slowly when the moment arrived? Or were the echoes heard nothing more than projections of the human mind, too eager to believe the past had not truly vanished? In that uncertainty, the icy corridor stood as a witness, offering no clear answers, only an atmosphere that made anyone feel small in the face of endless time. The light entering through a narrow crack above the icy corridor slowly transformed into something more complex than mere sunlight. It pierced the frozen crystal layers, scattering into thin lines that shifted with each falling drop of water. At times, the light formed patterns like delicate nets. At other moments, faint shadows that seemed to move on their own. If one stood still long enough, the icy wall appeared to hold images that emerged briefly, then vanished, like living paintings etched by time. There were moments when the reflections resembled the silhouette of a massive creature with an arched back, walking slowly behind the translucent surface. No sound accompanied it, only light dancing to shape its form. At other times, the shadows took the likeness of a group of early humans holding small torches, projected across the ice as though the corridor had once been traversed thousands of years ago, and their footprints still lingered in its memory. No one could determine whether this was merely an optical illusion, a simple interplay of water, crystal, and sunlight, or whether the ice itself was truly a screen reflecting the past. The phenomenon created an atmosphere difficult to describe. It was like standing between reality and dream, where the boundaries of time thinned. The light seemed to carry fragments of another world, revealing them only briefly, enough to stir the heart before letting them vanish beyond comprehension. For those who witnessed it, there was no fear, only a calm awareness that the world holds secrets far deeper than the mind can grasp. Every droplet falling from the ceiling of ice added another dimension to the spectacle. Each drop sparkled briefly before disappearing, like a star born and dying within seconds. In the silence of the corridor, it all resembled a slow dance witnessed by no audience except those who happened to stand there. That dance of light and shadow was not merely beauty, but also a subtle reminder that time always moves, records, and at certain moments, chooses to reveal fragments of its hidden truths. At one moment, the light scattering across the icy wall began to form sharper shapes. No longer vague shadows, but outlines resembling actual creatures. On that frozen surface appeared the silhouette of a woolly rhinoceros, its body solid, horn curved, its long fur drifting as though stirred by a wind that did not exist. It walked slowly, moving along the wall as if searching for something. The shadow did not last long, only a few seconds before dissolving again into fractured light. Yet those fleeting seconds were enough to make anyone watching feel the pulse of the past so near. Soon another figure emerged from the play of light. This time it was the shadow of a giant sloth, its body upright, long claws extended. Moving slowly, yet steadily, as if reaching for a treetop that was no longer there. The form looked more real than a mere reflection, as though the ice had preserved the actual movement of the creature, and was now displaying it again like a projection from another age. There was no sound, no scent, only light and shadow, but it was enough to create the impression that the corridor was not simply an empty space, but a stage where history briefly returned to life. For some who tried to interpret it, perhaps the phenomenon was nothing but coincidence. The meeting of light angles, dripping water, and crystal surfaces. Yet for those more sensitive, the performance felt like a message, as though the earth itself wished to remind that nothing lost is ever truly lost, only hidden in layers of time, waiting to be revealed. Each beam of light was a small window, each shadow an invitation to reflect on how fragile the boundary is between what exists and what once existed. The atmosphere within the corridor shifted into a deeper silence, an empty silence, but one that was full. A silence that made breathing sound too loud, and a heartbeat seemed part of the rhythm of the space. In that silence, the light continued to move, presenting fragments of the past, then erasing them again. All of it happened with a gentle rhythm, calm, as if time itself were speaking in a language that could only be understood by patience. The light that once revealed single figures now began to shape a larger vision. The icy wall became a vast screen, displaying a procession of ancient creatures walking side by side, as though on a long journey across grasslands that no longer exist. At one end of the corridor appeared the silhouette of mammoths with curving tusks, moving slowly with heavy steps, followed by woolly rhinoceroses clad in pale, thick fur. Among them stood towering giant sloths, moving with unhurried patience, while behind them the shadows of ancient bison closed the line. All appeared almost real, though they were nothing more than ever-changing reflections of light. The scene did not happen only once, but repeated with nearly the same pattern, like an echo replayed by the ice that stored it. Each time the light shifted, the procession reappeared, sometimes clearer, sometimes fainter, yet always giving the impression that the corridor was displaying memories of a great journey that had once taken place thousands of years ago. There was no sound, only silence filled with imagination. But in an open mind, one could picture the pounding of heavy footsteps, the breath of massive creatures, and the whisper of cold winds accompanying their migration. They moved together, not as separate shadows, but as a community traveling toward an unknown destination. Within those visions was a sense of togetherness, a reminder that the ancient world was once full of lives existing side by side. There was no hunting, no predators emerging, only a calm procession stepping forward in steady rhythm, as though the ice wanted to reveal another side of the past, not just tragedy and extinction, but also those quiet moments when giant beings lived in harmony, something that feels impossible in our world now. For anyone standing within that corridor, the sight might feel like witnessing an ancient ritual. The migration was not merely the movement of animals, but a silent celebration of survival, of the bond between creatures and the earth. Light and ice became the priests conducting the mass of time, displaying fragments of prehistoric life as a reminder that the world is always changing. Yet every moment finds its place within layers of memory that never truly disappear. Slowly, the majestic vision of migration began to fade, not vanishing all at once, but disappearing step by step, like twilight creeping in to swallow the light of day. The mammoths that once strode proudly grew fainter, their steps no longer clear, leaving only a fleeting glint of tusks before sinking into the transparent dark of the ice. The woolly rhinoceroses that once stood firm now dissolved into tangled shadows that could not be read. The towering giant sloth with its long claws gradually melted away, its form dispersing like mist swept by wind. The line of ancient bison vanished at last, leaving the icy wall silent and bare again. Yet the silence lasted only a moment, for the light soon found something else, something far more tangible than shadows. From deep within the frozen layers appeared faint lines that could not be mistaken for tricks of light. They curved, branched, and at certain points clearly revealed the shape of a skeleton. There was a massive frame imprisoned in the ice wall, not entirely visible, yet enough to be recognized. Long bones that might have been legs, rigid joints, even the faint outline of a skull trapped within the translucent depth. Sunlight penetrating the cracks made them gleam briefly, giving the impression the skeleton had returned to life, though only as light clinging to bone. There were no footsteps now, no slow movements, as with the earlier shadows. Instead, there was a denser silence, for what appeared was no longer projection or illusion, but the remains of bodies that once lived, evidence that those creatures not only existed in the past, but also died here, buried with the secrets of the ice that confined them. Each bone looked like a letter in a book written by the earth, a language never taught to humans, yet always legible to deep curiosity. The sight of the skeleton stirred a mixture of awe and melancholy. Awe that the earth could preserve something so perfectly, freezing it within time that seemed unmoving. Melancholy, because what remained was only bone, without flesh, without movement, without life. The migration shadows that had just been filled with dynamism were now replaced by a cold silence, a reminder that every journey, however grand, ends in the stillness of bone. And in that stillness, the icy corridor again stood as witness, offering no answers, only presenting the reality that time holds everything without exception. The first skeleton that appeared was only the beginning, for the longer the light pierced through, the more shapes of bone emerged behind the icy layers. At first, they were only faint lines. Then, gradually clearer arrangements appeared, long bones crossing each other. Skulls pressed against the wall like nameless faces staring through the transparent barrier. Some were massive with jaws agape, some small resembling ancient dogs or wolves, and some fragile like birds with wings spread stiffly. All were locked in unnatural positions, as though frozen in the midst of their final motion, halted forever before they could fall to the ground. Each time the eye caught a new arrangement of bones, it felt as though the ice corridor was no longer merely a natural passage, but a vast grave prepared by time. There were no gravestones, no markers, only the frozen wall serving as the cover. Yet unlike human graves arranged neatly with ritual, here death appeared without order, without harmony. Bones lay scattered in corners, mingled with one another, often indistinguishable from different creatures. A leg bone clung to another skeleton, an antler pierced between shoulder blades, even a spine bent unnaturally, evidence of sudden death under immense pressure. This icy corridor seemed like an archive preserving events without words. A documentation of nature never written in ink, but inscribed with frozen bodies. Each skeleton was a record, each crack a page, each reflection of light a marker that history never disappears, only waits to be read. Yet reading these pages gave no certainty, only more questions. Why were so many animals trapped here? Were they dragged by sudden avalanches of ice? Or was there a greater phenomenon, perhaps an ancient climate shift that forced them into refuge only to be imprisoned forever? There were no answers, only imagination left to wander. In the long silence, those frozen bodies seemed as if they wished to speak, though no sound emerged. They stood as witnesses to themselves, gazing from behind the ice with eyes long gone, yet with a sense that the gaze had never left. And for anyone standing within this corridor, the feeling was one of smallness, fragility, and connection to something older than all human records. It was like standing before an altar of time, where the offerings were not objects, but bones, remnants of one's vibrant lives, silent within a stillness that knows no end. When the gaze is directed deeper into the corridor, the arrangement of bones that once appeared chaotic begins to form the illusion of hidden order. Long bones aligned in rows, massive skulls facing one another, curved antlers creating arches that resembled gateways. Though reason insists that all this is mere coincidence, the collapse of lives caught in disaster. Another part of the mind feels a pattern, as if the earth itself is orchestrating a silent performance. There were no human hands, no architects, only the process of freezing that bound them into a formation resembling an altar. That impression grew stronger as the clear ice walls reflected imaginary torchlight that seemed to glow from the depths. The bones shimmered like crystals, giving the sense that this place was not merely a corridor, but a ceremonial hall of the ancient world, hidden for thousands of years. Among the giant skeletons were openings resembling a processional path, as though columns of immense creatures once marched here for a purpose, halted forever by the cold that entombed them. The silence in this place was so dense it felt heavy. No sound existed except the imagined echo of footsteps reverberating along icy walls. And in that silence, the vision arose that these bones were not merely remnants of death, but part of a wider ritual, perhaps a ritual unknown even to the creatures themselves. Their death, their freezing, and the arrangement of their bones seemed designed to create a sense of sanctity. Even without priests, without prayers, without a faith that could be recognized, one who stood there might feel themselves like a latecomer to a ceremony, standing in an empty hall that still preserved the resonance of unheard hymns. The slow dripping of water from the walls could be heard like sacred drops, while the piercing cold air felt like the breath of a deity guarding its secrets. The corridor no longer appeared as a dead space, but as one alive in another wail, because it held the echoes of a past never understood. And whoever tried to understand would only be drawn deeper into questions with no answers. The ice corridor slowly transformed in imagination into a cathedral never built by human hands. Frozen pillars rising on either side resembled colossal supports, while the arching ice overhead appeared like a towering dome reflecting pale light. Each rigid skeleton along the path looked like a statue deliberately placed, as if some grand architect had arranged everything to inspire awe and fear at once. There were no bells, no stone altar, yet the suspended cold air carried a sacredness no less than any place of worship known to man. Each imagined step upon the frozen floor echoed like movement within a hall of prayer. The massive bones leaning against the walls gave the impression of long benches, places for congregants who would never arrive. There was a large skull with branching antlers bowing toward the corridor as though leading a silent prayer. There were bones of giant birds with wings spread wide, resembling guardian angels with vanished faces. All of this conveyed the sense that this space was not dead, but was praying in a language humans could not comprehend. Light piercing through cracks in the ice resembled stained glass windows, breaking into pale shades of blue, green, and white. These colors fell upon the skeletons, cloaking them in robes of light that made the corridor appear ever more like an ancient sanctuary. Yet, unlike sanctuaries filled with prayers, here prayer was present in silence, in the mere existence of unmoving bones. Silence itself became liturgy, became a hymn without sound that repeated endlessly, never ceasing. Peace mingled with inner tremor, for the beauty visible here was born out of frozen tragedy. This cathedral was not built to welcome life, but was formed from layers of death united by ice. Yet precisely because of that, it felt sacred, reminding that life and death are only two sides of the same silence. For anyone standing there, it might feel like witnessing a service that began thousands of years ago and still continued, though its congregation were but skeletons unable to move, and its priest was the cold air that never ceased to breathe. The deeper the corridor was explored, stronger the sense grew that this frozen cathedral was not merely a place of death turned to stone. There was something hidden within the arrangement of bones, as though it was delivering an unspoken message. In some parts of the wall, smaller skeletons formed a pattern resembling a circle, as if marking the center of something greater. Elsewhere, long bones lay aligned in parallel, creating an unnatural straight line, too precise to dismiss as coincidence. These patterns appeared again and again, though faint, like whispers repeating a phrase that could not be understood. The thought that this was coincidence lingered, yet the more one observed, the more it felt that the corridor contained an ancient code, a form of writing not made with letters, but with bones as symbols. Perhaps it was only the mind's game, seeking meaning within disorder. Yet was not human history often interpreted in the same way from cave paintings? From stones aligned in uncertain patterns, from markings left behind without explanation. In the same manner, these skeletons could be another archive, waiting to be read by eyes bold enough to attempt it. Light falling upon these patterns heightened the sacred impression. The shadows of bones reflected upon the ice created increasingly intricate shapes, resembling mandalas or maps of the cosmos. For anyone standing there, it was difficult not to feel that they were in the center of a symbol far greater than the frozen bodies themselves. It felt as though the earth was writing something through the deaths of these creatures. A text not written in ink, but in bones fossilized within cold. Yet, like all ancient symbols, its meaning was never clear. It could be read as a map, or as a prayer, or as a warning. There was no certainty, only visions that kept the mind turning. And here the silence deepened, for not only bodies had been frozen, but also the message itself, locked tight, never to be fully opened by anyone. This ice cathedral became a silent library, where each bone was a letter, each skeleton a sentence, and together they formed a book that could never be fully read. The corridor now resembled a library never written with letters, but with bodies turned to stone in the cold. Each skeleton was a book that could not be opened, each bone a frozen page, and each crack in the surrounding ice a footnote never interpreted. There were no shelves, no guardians. Yet there was an impression of order that made anyone standing there feel like a latecomer, entering a hall of knowledge locked away for thousands of years. This library was neither destroyed nor open. It only waited, holding stories without ever telling them. The massive skeleton of a woolly rhinoceros encased in the wall could be seen as a chronicle of vast grasslands that once existed. Meanwhile, the bones of giant birds could be read as a chapter of skies once filled with wide, beating wings. The sharp teeth of ancient predators frozen in ice were records of brutal hunts of the fragile balance between prey and hunter. None of these were writings in the usual sense, but traces leaving behind shadows of stories. For those bold enough to interpret, this corridor was an archive of a vanished world, one never written by human hands. Yet reading this archive was an impossible task, for each skeleton raised new questions that never found answers. Why was it here? How did it die? What happened in its final days? These questions piled up like stacks of books never finished. And the longer one gazed, the more the realization grew that perhaps there were never meant to be answers. that this library was not intended to be read, but to be observed, to let unknowing itself become part of the experience. Amid the silence, the feeling arose that what was preserved here was not merely about animals that had died, but about an entire world that vanished with them. This corridor was not only a tomb, but a record of a different Earth. An Earth that once pulsed with the lives of giants, now surviving only in shadow. This silent library seemed to hold the voices of ancient forests, the thunder of herds across plains, the roars of predators echoing in the air, all compressed into frozen silence. And that silence was the strongest record of all, for it reminded that everything must eventually fall quiet, no matter how loudly it once lived. The silence that enveloped the corridor slowly turned into something that could almost be called breathing. Not sound, not movement, but a faint rhythm, as if the air within the ice expanded and contracted in unseen ways. That silence was not dead, but alive in its own manner, guarding secrets never told. It was as though the ice encasing the skeletons and traces of the past was a lung holding the breath of an ancient Earth, a breath withheld for thousands of years. And when one stood within it, they felt that the stillness was not absence, but a presence gazing back. The longer it was observed, the clearer it became that each skeleton behind the ice reflected a different aura. The frozen woolly rhinoceros seemed to carry endurance. The giant bird, encased in frost, suggested a broken freedom. The ancient predator, whose teeth remained sharp, preserved an eternal tension, all blended into an orchestra of silence, never played with instruments, but with remnants of existence halted long ago. This orchestra did not demand to be understood, only to be felt, like a melody looping endlessly in the mind without knowing where it began or where it might end. Within that silence, echoes sometimes arose from one's own thoughts, as though the corridor had the ability to amplify every whisper born in the mind. Small fears grew into vast shadows. Curiosity became a light shining brighter, and a longing for a past never lived grew into a feeling difficult to untangle. The ice corridor did not speak, yet it taught, not with words, but with reflections of emotion imprinted on anyone bold enough to listen to its stillness. There were moments when the silence seemed to press down, making the chest feel heavy, as though the very air was borrowed from another age. Then came the realization that what was felt was not merely psychological weight, but perhaps something real. That within the ice there lingered ancient air oxygen from thousands of years ago, now seeping out in quantities too small to be measured, yet enough to create the illusion that the breath inhaled was not entirely of the present world. Thus, standing there meant sharing breath with a world already gone. That breathing silence was not only a metaphor, but a subtle reality, binding the living with those who once lived. And when the eyes gazed upon the softly glowing cracks in the ice, the vision arose that perhaps that breath was waiting for someone calm enough to listen, not with the ears, but with the heart. As time flowed without any clear marker, the silence within the ice corridor slowly shifted into something resembling a dream half awake. The faint breath that had once felt like illusion now seeped deeper, shaping visions that could no longer be dismissed. The cracks in the icy walls seemed to turn into ghostly screens upon which ancient shadows danced, revealing glimpses of a world long buried. No loud sounds accompanied them, only echoes that seemed to rise within the mind itself, like memories not one's own, but so vividly present as if borrowed from time. Whoever stood there would feel themselves carried along, no longer a mere observer, but part of a narrative that had ceased millennia ago. The first vision to appear was a vast plain filled with pale, swaying grasses, moved gently by an ancient wind. From behind the tall blades emerged a massive figure, a woolly rhinoceros with eyes that glimmered softly, not frightening but weary, as if its spirit had waited too long. Its steps were heavy, yet rhythmic, each impact resonating as though deep into the earth's foundation. As it moved, other shadows followed, herds of colossal creatures with long teeth, curling horns and thick coats of fur protecting them from a once relentless cold. All of it seemed real, as if the corridor of ice had become a wide window opening into a time unreachable. Yet strangely, though the visions appeared alive, not a single sound escaped them. The echo of footsteps could only be felt in the chest, not heard in the ears. Their breath seemed to vibrate the air rather than produce audible noise. Everything moved in silence, a silence that still breathed, as though that world was presented deliberately in calmness, not to awaken fear, but to instill a melancholic awe. Anyone caught within that vision would feel their heartbeat slow, lining with the rhythm of those ancient steps, as if even time itself bent to that primordial cadence. The longer the vision lasted, the clearer it became that this was no mere fantasy. Tiny details resisted dismissal as hallucination. The grasses swayed and released minute particles that drifted like golden dust lingering in the air. The eyes of the ancient beasts reflected light with an intensity that almost radiated warmth. Even the air inhaled felt altered heavier, as though drawn from deep beneath the earth, infused with something foreign yet calming. All of it conveyed the sense that the prehistoric world was not wholly gone, but merely asleep, preserved in the ice, awaiting moments when it could reveal itself through cracks left ajar. And as the vision reached its height, awareness gently crept back. The shadows blurred, the corridor closed itself once more, and the cracked ice returned to being nothing more than dim, frozen walls. Yet the sensation did not vanish entirely. A trace lingered, like a faint fragrance left behind after a fire has burned out. The sense that one had just walked along the border of dream and reality, breathing in the air of a vanished world, even if only for a fleeting instant. The breathing silence had now become a dream, gazing back, and within that dream lay questions that would never be answered. As the vision faded and the corridor returned to cold and silence, something remained, a new awareness that could not be ignored. It was as though what had just been seen was not a mere illusion, but an invitation to step deeper. The frozen wall before the eyes now appeared different, no longer just an impenetrable barrier of ice, but like a thin surface concealing the space beyond. The cracks that once glimmered faintly now seemed to pulse softly, as though the heart of the ancient earth was still beating within. The feeling was difficult to define, a mixture of fear, longing, and a pressing curiosity. The breathing silence had now grown into a call a call not spoken in words but transmitted as vibrations running through the bones. Perhaps no one truly knows what lies hidden beneath the melting layers of ice. Is it merely skeletons, lifeless remains without spirit? Or is there something more? Something that has never vanished, even though the bodies have long been frozen. Scientific theories speak of permafrost preserving DNA, of the possibility of reviving ancient creatures through genetic engineering, of a world that might one day be recreated. Yet beyond theories, another feeling persists, harder to explain. That what was buried has never fully died, but waits in its long sleep, anticipating the right moment to show itself once more. Before such possibilities, the corridor of ice resembled a primordial library, its pages unreadable by ordinary humans. Each bone was a letter, each frozen hair a word, each crack in the ice a punctuation mark giving rhythm to the story. Yet, unlike a book, this was one that could never be fully read. For every attempt to understand revealed yet another layer, concealing deeper meaning. Like a fable written by the earth itself, left unfinished so that the reader would always return with renewed curiosity. And slowly, as eyes continued to gaze into that depth, a larger question emerged. Is the world we inhabit truly standing on its own? Or is it only a thin layer above another world still asleep? The melting ice opened fissures, and from those fissures escaped not only ancient air, but memories inexplicable. Perhaps not our memories, but the memories of the earth itself reflected into the minds of those who dared remain long enough. The breathing silence now transformed into a whisper not heard with ears, but implanted directly into awareness. The corridor remained calm, remained dark, remained frozen, yet those who stood within it would know that something was moving deep inside. Something that was neither body nor soul, but memory refusing to be forgotten. The mystery did not demand an answer, did not force understanding. It simply waited, waiting for humankind to decide whether to step further in, or to remain at the threshold, content with only faint shadows of a world long vanished. The whisper came without sound, yet it was clearly felt, as if it were slipped directly into the mind by something far older than humankind. No words were heard, but meaning seeped slowly, like mist creeping across the earth with no way to stop it. It felt like remembering something never experienced, a memory never possessed, yet somehow imprinted within the mind. Images of vast plains, herds of megafauna moving in calm procession, skies filled with colossal birds, and a cold, sharper than any winter known to modern humanity, all appeared as if they belonged to the self. The ice did not speak with a tongue, but with memories implanted effortlessly, turning whoever stood there into a vessel for the earth's long-forgotten tale. Each glowing crack along the corridor's walls now resembled lines of an ancient manuscript, writing sentences legible only to the heart. The light filtering through the fractures pulsed softly, as if following a rhythm not of this world. At times it appeared fast, at times slow, like a breath trying to match the heartbeat of the being observing it. There were moments when the vibration was so strong it felt as though the corridor itself was alive, welcoming human presence in ways beyond explanation. And within that presence arose the realization that perhaps the melting ice was not merely opening a path into the past, but allowing the past itself to enter the present. The whisper did not provide clear answers. It did not tell what had truly happened to the creatures frozen within, nor did it explain why their world had ended. Instead, it planted questions, questions that grew deeper the longer they lingered. Was extinction merely another form of slumber? Were those ancient beings truly gone? Or did they persist in forms unseen? Perhaps they were no longer bodies to be touched, yet they lingered in the air, in the soil, in flowing water, even in faint memories surfacing within the minds of those who stood before the icy corridor. Amid it all, one might sense a strange connection, as if they themselves were part of the same cycle. That life today did not stand upon a wholly new world, but upon the ruins of an older one, and those remnants of memory continued to circle, searching for ways to be recalled. The whisper rising from the ice felt not like information, but a gentle invitation not to forget, to acknowledge that another world still pulsed beneath the layers of time, a world unwilling to die completely, a world still striving to speak, even if only through prolonged silence. And in the end, as the whisper deepened, one began to sense that the breathing silence was not silence at all, but a language without letters, without sound, using time itself as its medium. A language that made humanity realize that nothing buried is ever truly gone, only waiting for the right moment to be heard again. The longer one stood within the corridor, the more it became clear that the whisper was not merely a shadow or illusion. There was a pattern within it, a kind of sequence repeating itself, like a heartbeat keeping count. At first, it was difficult to grasp, but after a while, the pattern began to feel familiar, as though the brain recognized it from something long past, even though no human had ever lived then. The pattern arrived as vibrations, pulses of light, and sensations flowing through the body. Each vibration carried a different weight, a piercing cold, a faint warmth, a heavy pressure, or a lightness that eased the breath. Together they formed an unwritten alphabet, a language not forged by humankind, but by the earth itself. This language did not merely convey information, it transmitted experience, planted images so vivid they blurred the boundary between vision and memory. Behind closed eyes appeared glimpses of a world breathing in a different way. Frozen rivers flowing sluggishly, herds of creatures with eyes glowing in the dark, and skies streaked with green-silver light that seemed to bend closer to the ground. All of it felt alive, as though standing on the threshold, separated only by a thin membrane of time ready to break at any moment. And the deeper the language seeped in, the clearer it became that the ice did not simply hold remnants of ancient beasts. It held awareness, not singular consciousness like a human mind, but a collective wana memory of millions of years embedded into water, earth, and air. Every layer of ice was a page in a vast book, written not with ink, but with the life that once pulsed above it. To hear it was not only an act of listening, but of embodiment. Bones, blood, even the rhythm of a heartbeat became part of the translation. There was fear, for the language was not human. Yet there was also calm, for it did not seek to dominate or to harm. It only wished to be remembered. It only sought acknowledgement, a recognition that what once existed still lingered, waiting. And slowly, the awareness began to send a clearer message, not mere glimpses now, but something more direct. A message simple yet firm. We are not entirely gone. As the message grew clearer, one began to sense that the whisper was not merely information drifting without purpose. There was direction within it, a call faint yet consistent, like a voice trying to reach through a heavy fog. At first it felt distant, as though rising from the earth's core, but slowly the sound drew nearer, crawling through the layers of cold air, seeping into the pores of the skin, until it pulsed within the bones. The call was not made of words, nor sentences that could be translated, but of a subtle pull touching the most primal instincts. It stirred the urge to step deeper, as if something awaited at the end of the corridor, something that could not be ignored. The longer one listened, the clearer it became that the call did not come from a single direction. It was like an echo bouncing from every side, as though the entire wall of ice spoke with one voice. Each step felt like approaching the source, yet at the same time moving farther away, for the call had no center. It was everywhere, wrapping the space, binding the air, and even weaving itself into the heartbeat. It was like being drawn by something without form, yet undeniable in presence. Within that call lay a vague promise, a sense that beneath the ice, within layers frozen for thousands of years, something still breathed. Perhaps not life in the shape humans would recognize, but life in the form of memory, energy, or a guarded awareness. The call carried both warning and invitation, as if saying, "Come, look, but prepare yourself, for what you find may never leave your mind." In the silence of the corridor, the body responded to the call unconsciously. There was an urge to close the eyes, to allow the senses to open to layers beyond sight. When that happened, shapes began to emerge more clearly. Shapes of immense forms moving slowly beneath the ice, like shadows of giant fish in a frozen sea. They were never fully seen, only glimpsed, yet enough to inspire dread and wonder. They seemed aligned, waiting for something, waiting for the moment when the ice would no longer hold them. And at the peak of that silence, the call shifted into an undeniable feeling. A compulsion whispered without sound, a command delivered without words. That feeling was simple yet forceful. Awaken us. The call did not stop at the whisper of being awakened. Began to reveal wider visions, as though lifting a veil over something never meant to be fully seen. From within the darkness of the ice, reflections appeared that were not merely of creatures, but of entire landscapes. A primeval world stretched within consciousness, so vast it was hard to believe it could be stored in frozen layers. Valleys bathed in greenish light, mountains with peaks glittering like glass, oceans not blue but black, with strange lights shimmering in their depths. All appeared not as still images, but as living fragments, moving, breathing, and older than anything humanity had ever known. Within these visions moved immense forms drifting slowly, not entirely solid. As if parts of their bodies were light, others mist, and the rest flesh suspended in time. They moved without sound, yet each movement sent vibrations felt deep into the marrow of the bones. They were not mere beasts or organisms. They seemed like consciousness taking physical form, something far greater than just bodies. And from a distance came the sense that there were not just a few, but countless numbers. They layered themselves, aligned in endless rows, forming a vast network that stretched between earth and sky. As that awareness seeped deeper, it became clear that the call did not come from a single creature or a single group. It felt as though the entire buried world spoke. Every creature, every tree, every river, every stone that had ever been. They were united into one voice, one will, to return. And though no words were spoken, the message grew clearer, heavier, more urgent. They did not merely wish to be remembered. Oh, they wished to rise. They wished to stand once more upon the surface of the present world. Yet beneath the call lay something deeper, something far greater than the awakening of ancient beasts. The call hinted that what slept within the ice was not only flesh, not only memory, but a collective consciousness so vast it could consume the world. It was not merely part of history, it was history itself. And if the call were truly answered, what would return would not just be ancient animals, but an entire world view. An old world that perhaps could never coexist with this one. The longer one stood there, the clearer it became that this mystery was not only about unveiling the past, but about opening a door to something that perhaps should remain closed. For there was no guarantee that the old world would be peaceful, calm, or welcoming of humankind. Only one thing was certain. The call was real, powerful, and each day it grew harder to ignore. The longer one stood before the trembling wall of ice, the stronger the sense grew that the call was no longer a gentle invitation. It began to shift into something pressing, as though the air itself had grown heavier, forcing the lungs to labor harder for breath. The vibrations that once resembled a calm rhythm now pounded like drums, repeating with increasing intensity, resonating inside the head. No audible sound was heard, yet the body felt it as if every organ vibrated in unison. Bones shivered, blood seemed to rush in stronger currents, and eyes watered though no wind cut through the space. All of it revealed that this was no longer passive communication, was a demand that grew harder and harder to resist. Amid the vibrations arose the sense that the old world beneath the ice had grown restless. Something trapped within had begun to stir, thrashing in silence, demanding release. The call no longer pleaded. It pounded, as though knocking furiously on a sealed door, insisting it be opened. And the stronger the demand, the clearer it became that the human standing within the corridor was not the intended recipient, but merely the conduit. They were not chosen, only stumbled upon, yet they had become the key. The primeval awareness did not need words to express its intent. Simply pressed, it filled the space until there was no space left for refusal. Behind it all lurked a greater fear. If the call were ignored, what then? Would the old world quietly sink back into slumber? Or would it grow more violent, clawing for another way to rise? There was an unsettling sense that such a world could never truly be buried. It would continue to knock, continue to press, until at last something cracked. And when that fracture came, no one knew what would emerge first, whether a flash of light a breath of alien air, or beings no longer recognizable to this age. Thus, the call turned into a subtle threat. It's not a threat in words, but one that seeped into the emotions, weighing down every second. It was as though a countdown had begun, and when the final moment arrived, the door would open on its own. The only question left was whether humankind would be ready to witness what the ice had held back all this time. Within the corridor of deepening silence, the pressure at last reached its peak. It was no longer mere vibration or whisper, but a force, almost like an unseen hand, stretching from behind the ice and touching the present world. The air, once cold, thickened into something denser, almost liquid, making every movement sluggish. The dim light within the corridor began to pulse, no longer reflections of lamps or natural glow, but radiance emanating from the ice itself. The glow shifted at times pale green, at times silver, at times a faint red, changing with the same rhythm as the unheard pounding still shaking within the chest. It was then that one could feel the door, long imagined as shadow, beginning to open slightly. Not fully, only a thin fracture, yet enough to release something that had been sealed away for thousands of years. From that gap did not escape sound, but feeling. A feeling impossible to define, woven from loss, longing, and anger long restrained. It was as if the primeval world stretched out its final memory, hoping someone in this age would be brave enough to face it. Shadows grew sharper, no longer only of colossal beasts, but of strange structures resembling a city, though no city of man. Pillars of ice and stone fused into arches that ignored modern geometry. Roads coiled in endless spirals, as if designed not for walking feet, but for gliding beings. From the depths, the faint silhouettes of towering edifices appeared. Some fractured, some collapsed, yet others still standing as though awaiting their rightful inhabitants. And within the center of that vision arose something far more terrifying, a consciousness staring back. Not with eyes, but with a presence so overwhelming it made the blood feel as though it stopped flowing. That awareness did not merely look. It judged, it measured, perhaps it waited. The sensation was too vast for a single human body to contain, too immense to tell whether it came from beyond or had already rooted itself within the mind. And at its height came a message, not in human words, but as a truth that pierced straight into the heart. We have risen. Even if you have not opened the door, yet, just like a dream fading upon waking, the vision slowly dissolved. The pulsing light dimmed, the thin fracture sealed again, and the air that had thickened grew light once more, as though nothing had ever occurred. Only the cold remained, not the piercing kind, but gentle, like a soft blanket draped over the body. The pounding that had once shaken the chest dissolved into stillness, leaving behind a silence so tender it almost resembled a quiet lullaby. And within that silence arose a peculiar feeling, not fear, not relief, but something in between. Like hearing an old bedtime tale, one that never truly ends. A story filled with mystery, yet precisely because it remained unfinished, it lived on within imagination, waiting to be continued someday. The corridor of ice remained, the door stayed locked, and the world beneath still breathed faintly, waiting for its moment. For those who had once felt its tremor, the memory would linger not fully clear, yet never gone. It would slip into dreams, sometimes as a faint shadow, sometimes as a calming chill in the middle of the night, as though that ancient world chose to remain present, not to frighten, but to remind that there are secrets far greater than daily life. Secrets that need not be solved tonight, for it is in uncertainty that sleep grows deeper and dreams drift further. And at last, within the restored stillness, came one final whisper, not heard by the ear, but felt in the heart. Sleep, the lost world will still be waiting for you.